Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Big Dreams, Great Things podcast. Today, I'm going to share something that has completely transformed the way I understand myself as a leader, as a human, how I work with clients, teams, and interact even with my husband and friends. And I promise you that by the end of this episode, you'll be looking at both yourself and your team dynamics in a completely new way. So let's dive in. Now, before we get started on the juicy stuff, I want to ask you, have you ever wondered why you approach problems in a certain way? Have you ever thought about why certain tasks energize you and while others seem to drain you out of all your energy? Have you ever stopped and thought why some people really annoy you? Maybe it's your business partner or your life partner, and their approach to doing things just seems completely different to yours. If so, if the answer is yes, and I think it probably is, you're not alone. Today's episode is going to shed some light on exactly why this happens, and more importantly, what you can do about it. I'm talking about the HBDI, the Herrmann Brain Dominance Instrument, and the whole brain thinking model. And while that might sound a bit complex, I promise you it's one of the most practical and simple to understand tools that I've encountered. And today I'm talking about how you can use that tool and what I've been learning about this tool to understand yourself and your business a bit better. Okay, let's start with a little story. Picture this. It was, 10 plus years ago. I'm running my first business and I'm sitting with my business partner who I used to meet with very regularly. And we were having a stressful conversation. We were dealing with a last minute stressful situation. And together we were trying to solve a problem. We're trying to solve the situation and work out the right path forward. So in my mind, we've got an urgent problem that needs solving right now. And my response, my reaction in that meeting is to start throwing out practical solutions, listing out things that we can do, options, how do we move through this? And thinking about the things that we can implement today and tomorrow to fix it. Now, he, on the other hand, he's off in what feels like dreamland because he's talking really futuristically, talking about how we could maybe build a new system or, create some software or hire some people and train them up on X, Y, and Z. And I remember so vividly this not being the first time that I felt like we were clashing heads and we were just going off in completely different directions in, what was to me the time when I needed his support so much. I needed his support more than ever. I remember feeling so frustrated, wondering, why can't he just focus on the here and now? Why can't he just talk about the practicalities and agree the way forward, the stuff we need to do today and tomorrow to move through this? Why couldn't he see? And why couldn't he talk in a way that was so obvious to me, the right way to deal with this? But here's the thing. In that moment, what I didn't realize was that I was being equally as blind to what was obvious to him. And that is because his brain, his problem solving brain, was to think about future and ideas and creative and, innovate and get really, really strategic. Whereas my problem solving brain goes to step by step, organized, sequential planning mode and gets very practical. And that's what's interesting. Now, 10 years ago, I was first introduced to this tool, this HBDI tool, and he and I both got an assessment done. And we had this massive aha moment about ourselves and each other. His thinking preferences were yellow. So, as I said, really creative, strategic, and imaginative. And mine is green. Practical, planning, organized. And although it felt like we were speaking different languages, we weren't. We were just using different parts of our brain to solve the same problem in the way that felt most natural to us. Neither of us were wrong. We were both bringing completely valuable and completely different perspectives to solve the same problem. Now, I know that you have been in a situation, maybe you were trying to solve a problem when somebody else seemed to be going about it in a way that felt completely weird to you. So take yourself back to that situation and think about, well, what's your natural approach to problems? Do you push for immediate practical solutions like I do? Or are you the one who steps back and looks at the bigger picture? There's no right or wrong here, but understanding your natural tendency can be completely eye-opening to what you're maybe not looking at, taking into account, and the value of looking at things in different ways. So, fast forward to about a month ago, I've been looking for a tool and some sort of scientific, practical way to support my clients to understand themselves a little bit more. So, long-term listeners or brand new listeners, I'm obsessed with authentic leadership. And that is understanding yourself first and foremost, and understanding, the strengths and the weaknesses of yourself, your preferences. And from there, knowing, well, who do I need to have around me and how do I need to work with these people so it feels really great to me and them. So I decided to revisit this tool that I had first been introduced to 10 years ago. And in fact, I decided to get accredited in the HBDI. And let me tell you, even though it was something that I learnt 10 years ago and was exposed to 10 years ago, moving through this accreditation process has been like such a process of holding a mirror up to me every single day of the training. And I want to share some of those insights with you today. Here are the big three things that hit home to me. And I'd love you to think about these, of course, in your own context. The first thing that I learnt through this process and through, re-exposing myself to this incredible tool is that we all have a preferred way of thinking. It's like your brain's preference or its default setting. You turn the car on, the seat is set in a certain way, the steering wheel is at a certain way. That's the first thing. We all have a preferred way of thinking, and that is our default way. The second thing is we absolutely can all think in all four different ways. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit more about the different types of ways. We can think in different ways, but we have a natural order of preference. So we start in a certain way, and then we've sort of got a next most instinctual way that we will think. And we can move through the different quadrants, but it takes energy to move away from our default. We 100% can do it. We're absolutely capable of accessing all these different thinking modes, but we have a default starting point, and then we have a preferred order that we think in. And then the third thing that I learned, which was super interesting, is that our thinking mode and our thinking pattern can change when we're under pressure. So it can either change radically. So in my case, I get even greener. I get even more planned, even more organized when I'm stressed. But for other people, they might shift up to being more of an analytical thinker and diving into the numbers, and they might shift completely their default way. And the thing is when we know our preference and we know how hard it is for us to move out of that preferred way of thinking and where we typically go next, we get to look at, well, am I viewing the world through a certain lens? Am I viewing my team? Am I viewing everybody? Am I viewing my work in a certain way? And, you then get to choose what you do with that information. So maybe take a moment and think about, well, when was the last time you felt super stressed or under the pump? And how did you act? Did you kind of, like me, write heaps of lists? Did you get really creative? Did you start drawing and brainstorming and drawing little maps or bubbles or something like that? What did you do? Or did you go to the numbers? Did you sort of go for the data and start crunching the numbers? Or did you pick up the phone and have a conversation with somebody? Maybe you called a team meeting. Maybe you reached out to your partner. It's interesting when you think about, what do I do when I'm feeling particularly stressed? Because that can give you some insight into your natural preference, and that is almost your default thinking mode. Okay, so let's dive now into the 4 different thinking preferences, and I'll try and get as practical and as simple as possible. So, as I said, there are 4 different thinking preferences, and I'm going to describe each one. And as I do that, I'm sure you're going to get some thoughts like, that's me, or oh, I do that, or oh, that's my husband, or that's my friend, etc. So let's run through them. The brain is divided into 4 quadrants in this particular model, the whole brain thinking model. And top left is the first quadrant that we talk about, and that is the blue quadrant. And that is really analytical thinking. So this is where you're diving into facts and figures, you're finding data, you're analyzing data, you're researching, you're gathering information, and really like that heavy facts, figures, and logic-based thinking style. Now, green, which is the second quadrant, bottom left, This is practical thinking. So this is where my brain loves to be. So this is action steps, concrete path forward, clear sequential steps, super organized, really thinking about the practicality of implementation and processes and organization. So no surprise there that that's what my brain loves. The bottom right quadrant, which is our third quadrant, is your red quadrant, and that is relational thinking. And what that means is that your default or your pull is to think about people and feelings. Maybe you go and talk to somebody. Maybe you think about how it's going to impact somebody. Maybe you think about how it's going to impact your family, your friends, the community. And this quadrant is really a communication quadrant, a connection quadrant, and a lot of decisions made from this quadrant are made out of gut feeling. And what might be interesting to some of you is that these are my two preferences: green, super planning, super organized, super practical, and thinking about the people, which of course is perfect for the work that I do. And then the fourth quadrant, the yellow quadrant, so it's your top right quadrant, is, abstract, creative, experimental thinking. So that's where, that's the quadrant or the type of brain thinking style where you're coming up with new ideas, you're thinking about the future, you're strategizing, you're innovating, you're thinking about the long term. And, this is this creative flowing type of thinking. And as you heard these descriptions, no doubt some of these things felt really true to you, and some of you might have felt resistant. And what's also interesting is that we can also attach judgment to some of the words, organized or controlling or analysis or numbers, etc., or people, etc. And so that is actually a really interesting thing to observe, and certainly something that I observed about myself as I was going through the accreditation training. So, as always, let's get super practical about how this applies to you and your business. Understanding your own thinking preferences can completely transform, of course, how you understand yourself, how your business runs, and how you interact as a team. And you've heard me say heaps of times, to be an effective leader, to be the best version, the best leadership version of yourself, you need to start with understanding your own default settings and your own preference settings so that you can design something that feels great from there. And it's almost the opposite of what, looking around outside the window, looking at other people's businesses and taking their formula and just planning it in your business. And if you do that, then you end up with somebody else's dream life, someone else's dream team, someone else's, your default is somebody else's dream. So to lead in a really authentic, powerful, graceful, and effective way, we need to look within and understand ourselves. So that's our first, practical application is this. It supports us to be self-aware leaders, and understanding your own default thinking style will help you to recognize, of course, your strengths. So 100% my planning, my organization, my ability to step things out, my ability to see the practical, implications of ideas, huge, huge asset of mine. Also, knowing that this is my preference, what it now has also brought to my attention, the fact that I've got a really big blind spot because my brain just doesn't want to think in a certain type of quadrant. So I need to support it and support myself energy-wise and whatnot to be able to think in that way, in a way that doesn't feel like really difficult, frankly. And the other thing is, by knowing this about myself, I know when I need to stretch. So when I need to get the help of somebody else. So for example, one of my least preferred modes of thinking is in the creative and innovation side, because I'm so practical, I'm pretty numbers based, and I love the people. That yellow, creative, futuristic is my lowest preferred style. So when it comes to AI, what I do and what I now will do more of is I will tap into learning and energy from other people to help stretch my thinking into that quadrant. And then what I know will come really easily to me is to then work through the practical application of whatever I've learned, because that's my brain's preference. Does that make sense? So the self-awareness tells me, of course, what my strengths are, but also where my blind spots are, and also where it might be tricky for me to shift in a certain type of way of thinking, which I know is beneficial, because thinking in all these ways is the most well-rounded way to go about many things: problem solving, innovating, etc. So the second way of having this understanding of ourselves can help us in our business is through knowing how we make decisions and knowing what our standard or preferred or our default mode of decision making is. So maybe you're inclined to make really practical, quick decisions. Maybe you're the sort of person who likes to gather all the data first. Maybe you don't usually think about the people impact and you are now aware that maybe you should. Or perhaps you overlook some of the creative solutions and don't spend enough time in the brainstorming mode. And this might either be the way you make decisions, or it may be the way that your team as a whole are making decisions, because they might be mirroring your preferred style. They might be working in a way that they think you want them to work. And you might actually be accidentally not getting the value of the different thinking modes that may actually be sitting there. And of course, the other way this comes into play heavily in your business is that your preferred thinking mode is going to define your communication preferences. So it will completely define and guide and set up your natural way to communicate. It will influence the information that you will tend to focus on. It'll impact the way you present information to others. It'll impact the way you prefer to receive information, etc., etc. So, of course, once you understand your own preferences, you can start to see, okay, so what can I do with this knowledge? How does that transform my understanding of myself, my preferences, the way I want to operate, the way I'm currently operating? And how can I get more in my zone, more in flow? And how can I make sure I'm tapping into the other quadrants or supporting myself to think in the different ways where it's appropriate? Okay, so we've talked a lot about how understanding your default or your preferred way of thinking can really help you to, of course, understand yourself. And like anything, once you understand yourself, then you can understand the differences amongst others. And then when we can kind of shift our thinking to go, differences aren't wrong, differences aren't bad, then we can start to maximize and really get the value out of all the differences, which is when it starts to get really exciting and is what the definition of a great team is: a group of people who are different, who are brought together, and together they do something amazing. Okay, so I've shared with you a little bit of information today about the Herrmann Brain Dominance Instrument, the HBDI, and I hope it's been interesting for you. And I hope it gives you the opportunity to reflect maybe a little bit about your own thinking style. What do you think maybe your default is? When do you feel most in flow? When do you tend to get stuck or frustrated? Or when do you even find yourself judging other people's for thinking or acting and reacting in a way that's different to yours, a little bit like me? And maybe you can even take that thinking to reflecting on the people on your team at the moment and think, yeah, that's right. That person does always come up with this, or this person's brain always goes to this, etc. Because like anything, awareness is always our first step. Once we understand ourselves better, then we can start to truly leverage and appreciate the differences that we have around us. Okay, so here's what I want you to take away from today's episode. Understanding yourself is the foundation of becoming a better leader. When you know your own thinking preference, you'll be able to become more aware of your strengths and more aware of your potential blind spots. And then you're armed with the power to choose what you want to do about it, if anything. And what's fascinating and amazing to remember is that we're all capable in thinking in all these different ways. Our brain just has a preferred path. And it's a little bit like being left-handed or right-handed. If I said to you, pick up a pen, you're going to pick it up with your default hand. I'm right-handed. I picked it up with my right hand. But if I said to you, pick it up with your left, you absolutely can do it. It's just not your preferred style. It's not the way you do it without thinking. So that's a really lovely way to think about. We can all think in all these different ways. It's just some of it is our preferred, some of it is our default, and some of it just takes a little bit more thinking to get there. So I know you are all on a leadership journey, and one of the ways to evolve yourself as a leader is to work on appreciating the different perspectives that you have on your team, around the table, and that you get exposed to every day, and to know how to motivate, engage, and really leverage those differences to ultimately achieve your business goals and to support everybody to be the best versions of themselves. So I hope you have enjoyed learning about the HBDI tool today. And if you want to learn a little bit more and discover your way of thinking, I would love to have a chat to you about it. You can take quite a scientific practical test, which then produces a report that we can then talk through together. It's super interesting and super insightful. So I'll be incorporating HBDI assessments into my leadership coaching programs, and also giving people the ability to just be assessed, to take the assessment, and then to have a debrief call with me. So if either of those are of interest, then of course reach out to me. I would love to have a chat to you and share with you the insights into your thinking preferences and learn how you can leverage them in your business, with your team, and on your leadership journey. So send me a message or jump on over and book in a Dream Team Discovery call. You can do that over at paulamaidens.com, and we can explore what might work for you. And if you're enjoying the podcast, of course, share this with somebody else. Please subscribe, leave a review. All of that hugely helps. And you can always tag me on social media as well. I'm at Paula Maidens Consulting. Okay, that's it. I'll be back here next week. Until then, have fun.